Hi, today we're going to learn how to draw a cone. The first thing we're starting with, as always, is our ground line, a nice light line, which is the imaginary line showing where our object touches the ground. Now, however tall you want your cone, we're going to draw a straight line up from the ground line, and then to help us create an isosceles triangle for the shape of the cone, we're just putting 2 dots where the edges would go, and from there we're drawing a straight line down to each dot, and that's just helping make sure our cone is even on both sides and not lopsided. Next, we're going to draw in the base of the cone, and for the base of the cone we're going to draw an ellipse. Now remember, an ellipse is not the same as an oval. An oval has big rounded sides like this. An ellipse has slightly more pointed sides like this. It's a very subtle difference, but you can see that these edges are a little more pointy than these edges. To get a nice ellipse, we're going to hold our pencil back towards the back of the pencil. We're going to float it very lightly on the paper, and we're going to go around and around and around until we get an ellipse that we're happy with. So once we get an ellipse that we're pretty happy with, we're going to go back and erase away all the extra lines until we have a really nice, clean, even ellipse. So I'm erasing away all these extra lines. Here's an ellipse that I like. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to re-sketch in using nice, smooth little marks. I'm going to re-sketch in the shape of that ellipse that I just drew so that I can see it better. Okay, now there's my ellipse for the base of my cone. I wouldn't actually be able to see this edge of it because this is behind my cone, but we're going to use it to draw in the cast shadow, which is what we're going to draw in next. So to draw the cast shadow, I need to create an imaginary light source. I may need to extend this edge of my ground line a little bit. And then I'm going to draw a line from my light source through the tip of my cone down to where it touches the ground line. And I'm realizing I need to move my light source a little lower in the sky so that I can get a longer shadow. So from there, I'm drawing a nice line through the tip of my cone down to where it touches the ground line, and right here is going to be the farthest tip of my shadow. Now to figure out where the sides of my shadow go, I'm going to draw a little X at the center of the back of my base, which is the farthest back part, and the farthest front point of my base, right in the center. From those 2 marks, I'm going to draw a straight line from each one to the tip of my shadow. And there we have the shape of the shadow for my cone. Now I'm going to erase my extra lines. So that means I'm erasing the line that I drew from my light source to the tip of the shadow. I'm erasing this center line of my cone. I'm erasing the back edge of the ellipse because that's the part of the base of the cone that I wouldn't actually be able to see since my cone is a solid object. Including also the back edge of the shadow I erased because I wouldn't be able to see that through my cone either. I'm erasing this center part of my ground line that's in between my shadow because that's not a line of the outside of the shadow, just an imaginary line. And just cleaning up any other little marks that need to be erased. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to carefully redraw in any little bits of my lines that got erased that needed to be there. And now I am ready to shade my cone. So I'm starting with the cast shadow, and I am shading in that shadow darkest towards the base of the cone. And as it gets further out, it stays in the same kind of shape as the overall shadow. So I'm starting out like that, but then as it's moving towards the edges, it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And as it's moving towards the tip of the shadow, it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And remember, my shadow shouldn't have any visible outlines, so no dark outlines around the edges. And then even though this part would be really skinny, remember my shadow does start right here at this center point, so I'm very carefully having my shadow start right there. It wouldn't go all the way around because this side is not blocking any of the light, but we're having just a tiny bit of the light be blocked on this whole side. So just cleaning it up so that I have this little tiny edge right here. I may need to even go back and erase it to make it a little bit skinnier. All right, now I'm ready to shade the cone itself. Now when you're shading the cone, let me show you a little sketch of what your shading should look like. The way your shadows fall should look like this. They should start up at the tip, and as they go down, your shadow is getting wider and wider and wider, and all of your lines are diagonal. All of your shading, rather, is diagonal. What it should not look like, and this is a mistake that a lot of people make, is how doing the shadow like we did for the cylinder, where everything is straight up and down. So we'd want our shadow to look like this, not like this. And let me show you what that looks like when I actually do the shading. So this is going to be the darker edge of my shadow because the light is coming in from this side. So on this side of the shadow, I'm starting out with darker shading. It's not quite as dark as my cast shadow. I'm using my 2B pencil or my middle value pencil. And my shadow is wider towards the base because my cone itself is wider towards the base. And as it's moving towards the tip, it gets thinner until it comes to a point. So again, the shadow is wider towards the base and gets thinner and thinner until it gets to a point up at the top. As I'm fading across, you'll see that I'm shading lighter and lighter and lighter. By the time I get halfway across, I should be fading away my shading all together so that it fades into pure white, about halfway across my cone. Then on this side, first I'm making sure this line is really light because this is the highlighted side of my cone. And I'm making sure the bottom part right here is really light because we're hardly going to be doing any shading, so we want to make it easy to get rid of our outlines. And then with my lightest pencil, which is my 2H for me, I'm just barely shading out from this side. And my shading's a little bit wider at the bottom and gets really skinny up at the top. And I'm making sure that right here, about 2/3 of the way over, I leave a nice pure white highlighted section that I didn't shade in at all. And that really is what helps make my cone look round. I also make sure that that highlighted section is a little triangular section that goes all the way up to the top. So part of that top of the cone should be purely highlighted. I accidentally shaded in a little more than I meant to right there. So it should be purely highlighted all the way up to the tip. Then I can go back in. Maybe I want to just create a little more contrast by darkening up a little bit of my shadow over on this side. Because of the reflected light, I might just make this part down at the bottom of the cone a tiny bit lighter of a shadow by darkening up the part up above. And that way, this part of the shadow looks just a little bit lighter because of the indirect light bouncing up from the ground. So I'm just going back and fine-tuning. It's always a good idea to do this with your shapes also to help you get them as nice as you can. And once I'm satisfied, all my shading is really nice and clean, all my transitions of value are really smooth, then I can go ahead and I am pretty darn satisfied with my cone.